back to the third episode of High Frequencies. I'm your host, Jordan from Brooklyn.
And I'm your host, Jamaal from Los Angeles. And today we have a very special episode coming for you today about Black History Month and the history of music.
This podcast is sponsored by Psychosis Music, which is the project of my co-host, Jamaal Taylor. Psychosis is an artist off Bass Tap Records with a remix album coming soon. Jamaal Taylor also specializes in mixing, mastering, and production for multiple genres, including pop, hip-hop, R&B, and electronic music. For inquiries, please email drpsychosis@gmail.com. That's drcykosis@gmail.com. For more information, visit psychosis.net.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Appreciate that. So today's episode is, because this month is Black History Month, today's episode, the first half of the episode, we're going to be going over the history of Black music and how it's affected modern music today. And then the second half of the episode, we'll actually be getting into how to actually do some of these things. Today in audio news, Pioneer has come out with a new DJ mixer called the DJ MS7. And this mixer is a 2-channel mixer. And one of the coolest improvements to me is it's kind of blurring the lines between music production and DJing. Just like its previous models, you have 8 different beat pads on it. So you can actually trigger your samples from those beat pads, and then you can scratch along with it. So it's pretty interesting.
Nice. Yeah. It's a DVS mixer?
I think so, yeah. And I think it integrates with Serato. So cool. It basically is like a sampler mixed with a scratch program. So yeah,
very cool.
It's pretty interesting.
Nice.
I figured it'd be something you'd be interested in, especially.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we got a really, really awesome episode for you today. Black History Month. We're going to be discussing the history of music through the beginning up until today.
Yeah. More specifically, we're going to be talking about how, actually, you know what? Let's just get into it.
Let's do it. Let's
just get into it. So as some of you know, as I'm African American, if you're watching live, you already know that, but on an audio podcast, I'm African American. So Black people were forcibly imported into America starting in about the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s. And it's called the Transatlantic slave trade. So a lot of people from West Africa and Central Africa were imported into the Americas, including the Caribbean, including the United States, including what's now South America and Brazil and all these different places across North and South America and Central America. So back then, when these slaves were toiling away in the fields for hours and hours and hours, they actually developed these slave songs, and they brought with them a lot of songs and a lot of melodies from Africa. And so while they were passing the time, while they're just picking cotton or tilling the fields for watermelon or tilling the cornfields, essentially just farming all day, they would sing these songs to keep themselves occupied during this hard menial labor. And those songs eventually turned into what's called the spiritual. And the spiritual is kind of the root of all the different music genres that Black people have come up with. And this is the earliest documentation that I was able to find was this book that was literally called Slave Songs. And it basically had the notation, it had melodies, it had everything, all the words that were included. There were songs about how hard the work was, how they felt that they shouldn't be slaves, how they wanted to rebel. That's basically what most of the songs were about. And I actually have a very short slice of one that I'll show you guys so you guys can kind of hear what it sounds like. And I'll just play, this is a PBS special, so I'm just going to play a little bit of it. But so that type of, let me switch back to Zoom here. But that type of music eventually became what's known as gospel music. And gospel music is something that obviously is very intertwined with African-American Christian culture and church culture. Because back then, a lot of the African religions were essentially replaced by Christianity when they came to America. And so we started using that rich musical history and infusing that into our religious history. And then gospel in the late 1800s, early 1900s, eventually turned into jazz. And people started including guitars and horns and drums. And jazz, I think, is probably one of the most interesting, truly American music genres that have ever come about.
Yeah.
And honestly, jazz is like one of my biggest musical influences. Even though I make a lot of hip hop and a lot of electronic music, jazz to me is probably my main, like,
for sure,
my first love.
I feel like that's where a lot of all the genres came from. Is jazz, whether it's hip hop or whether it's something. A lot of these samples are from the 30s,
from
and 20s,
jazz.
and
Yep. Yeah. So, I know you know a little bit about this because you're also a hip hop head. What are some of your, for example, what are some of your favorite like jazz instruments or jazz songs to sample?
Some of the artists, some of the artists that really inspired me during. Now, these are not the beginning of times in a sense, like the early days, but I made a list of some of the earlier artists that inspired a lot of what I do and a lot of the music I listen to, and something that I feel is very significant in the history of music in general.
Yeah.
And a lot of these, like people like Marvin Gaye, Quincy Jones, Isley Brothers, Brothers Johnson, the OJs, Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton,
Parliament. Yep.
For sure. Kool and the Gang. I mean, I saw them live, and they are, even to this day, maybe 5-6 years ago, or a little more. Yeah, they're like ridiculous live. Like, ridiculous.
I've never seen them live. That would be awesome.
Oh my god, it's something very, very recommended. I think it was like in 2012 I saw them or something. But Stevie Wonder, Rick James, Bootsy Collins, Chic, Nile Rodgers, all stuff.
Nile Rodgers,
his like chorus sound, the sound of the chorus of the 80s. You know, and something that really, really, really inspired a lot of bass music and a lot of, I think, of today's music was the artist King Tubby. I love King Tubby.
King Tubby,
Prince Jammy is another one, but King Tubby
Scratch
for me,
Perry, he was really cool too.
All these guys, they just really pioneered bass music or trippy, interesting music that wasn't normal, wasn't what you would normally hear. There's a lot of delays, a lot of reverb.
It's multi-dimensional,
like altered state kind of stuff. And it's really, really, I don't know, interesting. And it still correlates to today, the value of today's music. And like, you could play that. I even will play some of those songs I here and there.
I think I have a couple of old dub records. Like,
for sure. I got a bunch of 45s, those dusty 45 or the salty 45s, because they get a lot of corrosion because they're on the islands or whatever, and the salt corrodes the records. So a lot of these records you find in the shops in America, at
scratched
least
up.
What I found, they just sound like, and you can hear the music under them because of all the corrosion on the vinyl. But I just love it. I don't know. It adds to it. Something about that. Just though, it's like you can hear that everything. That's what I love about jazz too, is you can hear the moment they were recording the record and the feeling that went into everything that they played. And it's just a lot more, in my opinion, this is super subjective what I'm saying, but there was a lot more soul to it than some of the things of today. But don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of soul music today. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's people who could play 3 notes and you feel it. And today, it might take like an album and then you feel them a little more.
I think so one thing that's like a consistent thread through all of like Black musical history, especially, I think it especially started with the blues, because the blues, it was storytelling. That's basically what it was. But being that it came from the South, being that it came from people who were former slaves or their parents were slaves, that was when blues to me was kind of, before it was exported to like up to Chicago and before it got exported to other places, like when it was in Alabama or the Mississippi Delta, like where it actually started, the storytelling that they were doing were real stories. Like it was the story of their lives. It was the story of like things that they had gone through, and that could mean it was something good or it was something bad, but it was about the blues. That was what the blues was. It was that honesty. And I think
relatable.
Yes. And I think the fact that it was honest and it wasn't something that was necessarily like, for example, like modern pop music, where it is very manufactured and it's very like, it could be like a love song, but it may not necessarily be that the artist themselves is going through that situation. Like
Yeah.
with the blues and with a lot of soul music, it's about something that actually is happening to that person. And it's
Hard
almost,
times.
yeah. And it's almost like it's almost like the music is like the journal, or like I heard someone else say this, I can't remember who said it, but they said that like hip hop is like the CNN of Black culture.
Yeah, I
Where it's
mean,
like there's reporting of certain things happening in certain places.
yeah,
And I
I
think
mean, I
that's a
love it
consistent thread throughout all of musical history and Black music
for
history.
sure.
Yeah.
That's something I feel I identify a lot with
Yeah.
is those, hard struggle. How about
Yeah.
struggle? We
Yeah.
could say. Is I find a lot of music that writes about that, writes about what they had to go through, writes about what a hard time or something like that.
Yeah.
When I listen to that during a hard time, it like
Oh yeah.
becomes a soundtrack to your life. It becomes
Yeah.
like a part of who you are. Then when you hear it 10 years later, it kind of it's like a
Yeah.
flashback
It
to
takes
that
you back
moment.
to that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I and don't get me wrong, I love a lot of kinds of music,
Yeah.
but I feel that I identify more with that style of music than somebody who says like I got 16 cars and $80 million and all this like boats. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, those are good songs, but I don't have that.
Yeah.
I don't have one car at this moment. I
Yeah.
live in New York. We don't need cars.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like
I mean, I
so
lived in New York for a long time. I'd never had a car in New York.
yeah, so it's a matter of like when
Yeah.
somebody's talking about what they had to go through to be able to do music, to just to still
Yep.
like
Yeah.
one of those people that I like it's like People Under the Stairs. They're like a hip hop
Oh
group.
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if you,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I love just listening to like their words that they say because it's like a
They're
story.
awesome.
You just
Yeah.
keep listening to everything that that's
It's
going
funny
on
too
and
because, for example, I grew up in Queens and I grew up in Cambria Heights, which is
Mhm.
in Jamaica, Queens.
Okay.
And just right down the street, literally on Linden Boulevard, I lived right off of Linden Boulevard. And when I was a kid, I would like rap with my friends and like beatbox with my friends. Like
That's awesome.
every other person knew how to play the piano. Like it was a very musical place. And like, for example, A Tribe Called Quest is from that same neighborhood. 50
Yeah.
Cent is from that neighborhood. LL Cool J is from there. And like, I didn't realize it at the time, but like, I grew up surrounded by people who were just a part of creating hip hop as is.
Yeah.
And like, I've met Jam Master Jay before. My dad
That's awesome.
actually wrote Run DMC, Reverend Run. He actually
Yeah.
wrote his first book, or helped him write his first book. So
That's
it's like,
crazy.
I didn't realize at the time when I was a kid, like how ingrained in hip hop culture, like the neighborhood that I was living in was. But now that
Yeah.
I'm older, I'm like, whoa, like I definitely appreciate that time a lot more because for me, now that I'm older, I realize that like it's a special place. It's not every neighborhood is like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it gives you something other people don't have too.
Yeah.
It gives you that edge,
Yeah.
and that's something that, being influenced by, I'd say, that culture, or being influenced by
Mhm.
a different period
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
time in a city, especially New York, especially in,
Yeah.
in,
New
in the
York in the
South.
90s is a very crazy place.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think that's great, and it
Yeah.
adds a lot of value to the music that.
And I think too, like for example, you said you identify with hip hop because of the struggle, and I think a lot
yeah.
of what hip hop is about talking about your struggle and talking about, and I think a lot of people identify with that because struggle is something that's universal.
Yeah.
Like it's
And-
not something that necessarily that only this person goes through or only that person goes through. Everyone
for sure.
to some level, to some degree, goes through some struggle in their life. Like maybe there's like a billionaire's kid who may not experience struggle, but even for them, they could have the pressure of their parents being like,
struggle, yeah.
you got to go to college and you got to go to Harvard and you got to do this. Like they could, that could be their
For sure.
struggle, and they could identify with hip hop because they feel it. It may be not be as someone else's, but I think that's why hip hop is so universal. And like,
Evolution, you know?
yeah,
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I knew at a young age, music was, what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
So, I made the choice at like, after college well, I was working like not so good jobs, things I hated.
Mhm.
And one day the boss came to me and he was like, hey, you always do music. You're always talking about music. Why don't you do a job you love? I was 19. It was
Mhm.
like my first job after college. And, So then I started teaching music, like guitar. Had been playing guitar for a while. So I started getting into music. I started saying from that day forward, I want to pay all my bills with music, no matter what it takes. Like I want to just find, no matter what. So I had to develop new skills and to be able to continue to do music. And for me, that was my struggle. And that's how I identify a lot with hip hop and a lot of people who have written this kind of the lyrics in it or dedicated themselves to this is they're willing to not have a plan B. And when you don't have a plan B, in my opinion, I feel that it's a lot more genuine. What you the product that you present is a lot more genuine, and you know, there's
something beautiful in not having in literally dedicating your life to this art form. Like I think that's really what you're getting at. You know what I mean?
And another thing to say. It'll give you 100 or 200% more opportunities because if somebody to me is like, hey, I've been walking out the door before, my phone rings and they're like, do you want to play the club tonight? My other DJ canceled. And I'm like, sure. Instead of me being like, oh man, I got to practice. Like, that's why you practice every day.
That's why you practice all the time.
That's why you don't work a job you don't like and you practice during that time and you work a job you do like. You know, these kinds of things. But that force is there to be a struggle to really find your place in society and find where you can pay your bills and still have money like everyone else, but not have to devalue who you are or what you've chosen to do. And that's what I think hip hop gives is that the ability for that evolution to exist.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, part of me and why I do what I do now is I made that same promise to myself when I was I think I was around the same age. I was 18, 19 and I was in college, but I was not into it. I went to like a liberal arts school in Connecticut and I was just not into it. And I took a year off from college. And then during that year off, I came to visit my mom in Los Angeles and it was just supposed to be a vacation. It was just supposed to be 2 weeks, but I bought a one-way ticket. So I came here. And then I stayed with my mom for a little bit. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, when it was time to go back, I basically called my dad and I was like, I'm not coming back. Like, I'm staying in LA. And then within the next month, I had enrolled in Los Angeles recording school. And that first week that I was in school, I was learning about all these different possible careers and like all these things that I could do in the music industry. And I just told myself, I was like, you know what? I'm going to find a way to 100% support myself from just music, just music things. Just maybe it's audio engineering, maybe it's DJing, maybe it's being a music producer. It ended up being all of the above, but still, for sure. I think that's like how I got to this point.
That's what makes you though have that that makes you have the ability to say that you're a music producer or that you do music, in my opinion, because think of this. If you go to a doctor's office and the doctor's like, hey, you know, I work at a grocery store for my day job. I just do this on the side. Or you go to get on an airplane and he's like, you know, I work at whatever, you know, but I just do this on the side. This isn't my main job. I would not want to get on that plane. No. And I would not want to be seen by that doctor. Yeah. I want to see people who don't have a plan B. They're like, you know, I don't know why I like to fly, but this is what I do. Or I don't know why I like to be medical and do medical things, but this is who I am. Yeah. So this kind of a thing, when you're a musician, why are you going to pay $30 to go see a show or $30 for a record or a hoodie or who knows what? Because you feel that a person has provided a value to your life. And that value with me was influence. That value with me was saying, hey, you can be anything you want to be. And you don't have to be a billionaire or you don't have to be born with a silver spoon or you don't have to know somebody in the industry. You can literally just do it all yourself. And that to me, I learned from listening to hip hop music, from listening to music that was genuine and not necessarily watered down just to sell things that people didn't even care if it would sell. That's why a lot of hip hop artists will make 800 songs because they have to. Like they have to. There's no reason. There's no other choice. That's why I will play as many shows as I can because it makes me feel better the more I do. It's not like I want to be like, I played this many shows. I don't even keep track. It's just a matter of when you become this weird thing, you have to feed it. You have to feed this monster. And that
I totally 100% feel that as an artist.
Yeah, man. And that's when you see other artists, who have that same monster in them, you acknowledge that. And that is I feel in hip hop, I feel in turntablism, I feel in a lot of any kind of good styles of music that is legit.
Real,
you feel
real.
that. You feel that connection with it, you know?
Yeah.
It plugs you in.
Yeah. I think too, that's partly why I got into electronic music, is because when I learned about the history of electronic music, it kind of is parallel to hip hop. So they're in New York, they're specifically in the Bronx. Like you had DJ Kool Herc, you had the Zulu Nation, you had all these different things in the Bronx that were like starting all these different things. But then New York culture at the time was heavily disco. Everything was about disco. But then towards the end of the 70s, people started hating disco because it became over commercialized. It became super manufactured, just like pop music is today, just like any other type of pop music. But then Larry Lavon and his like his DJ crew, what they started doing was, instead of playing disco records, they started taking some of the hip hop production techniques from like drum machines, like the TR-909s and TR-808s of the world, and they would take these old disco records and they would sample them just like in hip hop, and then they would overlay their own drums over it. So these big, heavy, smacking drums, just like in hip hop, but instead of it being like a break beat, it was a straight beat. So it was more of like the and it was more like I guess more heavily gospel influenced, and more heavily like, it just was a different strain, but the same root. So they took a lot of the same production techniques, but they just went more of like dance to this, as opposed to like tell me a story over this.
I get it.
Yeah. And even like when I learned this pretty recently, but Larry Lavon, the guy, he's credited as the guy who created house music. And the reason why it was called house music was because when he came back from New York, he went to Chicago. And in Chicago, he met up with these dudes who owned this warehouse. And in the warehouse, he was playing these sampled records with his drum machines, like recorded into the records. And people didn't really know what to call it, because they were like, there's this new sound. Like, they have like hip hop going on in New York, but like there's this new sound. And people just started calling it, like at this nightclub, people just started calling it house music because it was at the warehouse. So that's how the name caught on. And even like the format of like the DJ, and like the DJ being up on the thing, and like people coming in and there's this big dance floor, like that format started with house music. And so once I learned that, I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. Like this is partly why I like electronic music.
Oh yeah. House music has such a cool history. To be honest, I'm not as knowledgeable as hip hop, because hip hop has been the one to feed me and pay my bills always.
Yeah.
But I like house, the forms of it. But that's really awesome, and it's really cool that there's a similar history to it, and it sort of correlates similar to hip hop, which is, and it's interesting.
They're kind of interrelated a little bit, but two completely different worlds.
But something I like that I think is a very mutual element in both is like that dirty, like 12-bit grit of like just something that was supposed to be recorded well, but it ended up being recorded not so well.
Yeah.
And at the end, it just sounds so good, like all of it. I don't know.
I think there's a big, like for example, like talking about Roland, a lot of the reason why hip hop and house music is the way that it is because of drum machines. And it's because those musical items were cheap. So when Roland first came out with their, for example, when they first came out with the 808, the 808 was marketed as a way to replace your drummer. And so when people would play it, they were like, this sounds nothing like a real drummer. It's super electronic. I hate this thing. And so they would play with it for a while and then take it to a thrift shop. And then all of these producers, essentially, this is before I guess the term really meant what it means today, but all of these producers would find these things for cheap, for like a couple $100 as opposed to a couple $1,000. And they would eventually become the people who started making hip hop and house music because they had this cheaper piece of equipment that then they could use to just make a beat from scratch.
Yeah. And that is the 808 that we'll be discussing later on in the show today. That'll be a really cool
We're going to get
topic.
in depth on that.
For sure. Are we already into the like turntablism and hip hop? You want to start with that?
Yeah. Let's move on to turntablism.
All right. So
get into
talking about a little bit of turntablism. For you guys who do know all about turntablism, I'm not a historian in any way.
Same.
And I'm going to say a lot of subjective, arguable things that 45 people can say invented one thing and the other people can say invented another. Nobody knows, but somebody does. So a lot of history. It's hard to say who invented what first.
Yeah.
And that's not the point of this. The point of this is just to say somebody invented it. And if you
somewhere.
if you feel that you might have another a year to some of these that we're going to talk about, email us, highfrequenciespodcast.com or
Let
at
us
gmail.com.
Yeah.
Highfrequencypodcast@gmail.com. And let me know, because next year at this time, I would love to do a 2.0 of this turntablism history and have it be all the updated things. Because I just wrote, what I felt was moved me, motivated me, things that inspired me as a turntablist to what I am today.
Yeah.
So to start with, a history of hip hop. Do you want to start with the history of hip hop? Did we talk about it a bit, or do you want to just jump into turntablism?
Yeah, let's start a little bit of the history of hip hop. So from what I know, I'll say the same disclaimer. I'm not a historian. I don't actually know. I haven't read all the books. I've read some of the books, but from what I know and from what I've learned, hip hop started in the Bronx. 100% hip hop started in the Bronx. But there was a group of poets in the late 60s called the Last Poets. And a lot of the hip hop producers credit them as being huge influencers on eventually what became hip hop. Because what they would do is they would have bongos, they would have drums, and they would say poems over these drums. So essentially, they were making hip hop before it really had a name, because they were essentially rapping over a beat, which is what hip hop really is. And then as we move from the 60s into the early 70s, as you know,
for sure. Yeah. So history of turntablism. Now, to add to what Jamaal said, I think, in my opinion, and again, subjective, guys, super subjective. I think all of the music from the 70s and disco and funk, I like Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah,
I call that hip hop. I call that hip hop in a sense. It's like, it's not, but it is.
I think George Clinton calls it hip hop. I'm pretty sure I saw an interview where he calls his music. He's like, what I do is hip hop too.
Yeah, because to me, hip hop is like genuine music. That's just anything that's in my Mozart. That's a form of hip hop. Beethoven. They're real music.
Yeah, I think that's whatever you want to call
it. Because people made up genres. They're just classifying things. There's no genres. All right. So history of turntablism. So August 11th, 1973. What happens here? We get a back to school jam. Kool Herc, he's throwing a party, and he has a bunch of records on it. And it's, again, subjective, guys. The first instance of what happens is, I got some records here. So what happens is you get two records like this, the same song.
Same exact record.
Yeah, same exact thing. And then you want to pull them out. And when you pull them out, let's take a look here. How the record works is you got a label on each side. Now, if you don't know, the label, if you buy two of the same records, it's not going to be matched up. Meaning, if it looks like this here, the other one could look different. So I just turned it for you guys who are audio only. Yeah. So you got to listen to the record, and you got to move it around until you find the beginning of this specific section. And the specific section happened 2/3 of the way to the song. And the specific section was called the break. Okay. And the break, it took a break from everybody. It's like everybody's talking. All of a sudden, just stop talking and take a break. Let the drummer do his thing. Yeah. And this would be called breaks, because stuff took a break
in the song. Yeah.
Yeah. Break in the song. So, you would take the breaks, and let's say they're 8 or 16 bars long, right? Some crazy toms or something. And it would be the same record. So ahead of time, I don't know if he did this, but ahead of time, you want to mark the records visually or put a little sticker on there. Yeah. So if you are putting a sticker on there, you find where it is, and then you just put a line or something on the record so you can identify it.
Or a Sharpie or something like that.
Yeah, something. Yeah. Put it at the 12 o'clock mark. And then put the other one at the 12 o'clock mark or somewhere. And then you'll be able to rewind them to the exact location. Yes, now, if you don't use a marker, you could just remember where the records kind of look. It's a little more difficult. Yeah. So he would let it play to the end, and then he would jump to the other turntable with the exact same record, and he would play that beginning of the breaks as he rewound the other side. Now, if you're not a DJ and you don't know how this works, there's a thing in the middle of the mixer. You can see here in the video. and it's called a crossfader. The crossfader, it's going to cut off one turntable essentially when you move it to the side. So it can be set up in a few different ways, but when theirs was probably set up normally, but in today's world,
because we have DJs now.
You either have it immediately cut in. So it would be like, if you're looking on the video, right as this tiny little fader just moves
slightly in,
just a little bit, the sound comes in fully. And another way is it would fade in slowly, and you could slowly fade.
And that's the normal way, is the slow fade. Yeah.
And regardless of how it worked, it moved to the other side. Yeah. So if it was a slow fade, you would just simply move it quicker.
All the way over, yeah.
And it would happen right as the end of the break was played, and he would cut off that turntable, move it to the other side, and begin the beginning of the break. As he switched records on the other turntable and played a new break, or continued that break. Now, during this time, people were dancing to this, and they were only dancing to this weird part of the songs. The songs became not as recognizable because there's no lyrics. There's no, it's harder to tell what it is. So they would call this break beats, and they would call them break dancers. So this really, in my subjective opinion, started turntablism and hip hop with people breakdancing and DJs playing the beats. And then you had people come on with microphones, and they would MC over it, or they would sing a poem over it, which eventually became rap. And additionally, the only other part we're missing here is the visual aspect, which was the graffiti artist. So the graffiti artist would, everyone would be listening to the DJ. The DJ would be playing what he felt for the breaks, and then the rapper would be vibing off the DJ, or the MC would be vibing off the DJ, and the graffiti artist would be painting to what they heard, and then the breakdancers would be dancing to the DJ. So it was really, really reliant on the DJ to have a really good selection of records and to be good at switching them. So there was
the DJ
no
was
delay.
The star,
basically. So it was tough. It was tough. It was a new thing. So we credit cool DJ Herc with his back to school jam in August 11th, 1973. Now, additionally, Grandmaster Flash was a huge influence in this method of extending breaks. And he was said to be one of the first as well. Subjective, who invented it first. I
think one thing too, to mention too is the fact that them throwing this party and them having like this huge speaker system and like having mixer and having records and things like that, that was something that they imported from Jamaica. So that was that sound system culture that existed already in Jamaica with reggae and with dance hall culture that they were then bringing to New York because they were immigrants from Jamaica coming into New York. And then they
Very good point to add.
Hip hop. Yeah.
To create block parties and things like that.
Exactly.
Very, anything else at any point in time? I'm just kind of saying some things. Yeah, cool. So 1975 comes along, and we get, I don't know if it's 1975, by the way. I wasn't there. We get Grand Wizard Theodore. He's playing a record all the way up, and his mom walks into the room and says, turn it off. So he grabs, instead of hitting the stop button, he grabs the record with his hand, and then he hears the sound it makes. And he keeps kind of moving his hand back and forth, and he hears the sound it makes and the effect it has on the music. For you guys who don't know, I'll throw some audio clips up later of some cuts, but it'll sound like you're moving a thing back and forth, right? So
we know what it sounds like now, but back then that was the first time that was happening.
It was like, wow. So he sat there and he practiced it for like a month or so, and then went out and then performed it at the show, and people were like, minds were blown. They're like, oh my God, this is not only rewinding the breaks, but he's playing it while he's rewind. Like what he said, I don't know the exact quote. He said something along the lines of, you're hearing the back cue part you're not supposed to hear, which is sort of scratching. So he's credited to the creating scratching. And for you guys who don't know what scratching is, it's just moving your hand back and forth on a record and making music out of music or out of a audio piece. You could have one note and you have to make something out of that. So it's a creative kind of construction of a melody or a rhythm from an existing piece of something. So, okay, moving on, skipping a bunch of stuff. 1983, Grand Mixer DXT in his song Rocket. Now, I was born in 87. I was not around then, but this was my very first time I ever heard a turntablist in my life. My parents had MTV Replay, I think it was called, something Replay. It was the double CD disc album, and it was all the hits on there, and one of the songs was Rocket. And I remember hearing that, and I was like, what is that? What instrument is that?
Nice.
And I would go to the music store, and I would be like, what is that? And they'd show me the turntable, and they'd be like, this is what makes that sound. And I would be like,
what?
How does it make that sound? And I just couldn't put the two together. I was like, how does it make the sound? And they would have a hard time telling me. So I remember telling my mom, I want to get this. I want to get turntables. I was maybe like 10 or 11. And she was like, well, what are you going to do with them? And I was like, I want to make this sound.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, how? And I was like, I
don't
just
know.
really did. I didn't really know. So,
awesome.
And I tried with my parents' records, and it didn't work. It didn't sound the same.
Yeah.
So they ended up getting me a guitar. I didn't get turntables until I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I remember being 12 and hearing it and being like, I want to sound like that. And still to this day, if you haven't heard it, go listen to Herbie Hancock Rocket. Grand Mixer DXT is the one doing the cuts on there, and it is game changing. It inspired so many DJs. And the cool thing about me hearing it is it was literally the first time I ever heard this in my life.
I think
there might have been a cut
in
on the
today's
radio.
world, people find it hard to understand how those sounds come out of the machines. Like I still even see in like Facebook comments and stuff like that today, like a computer isn't an instrument, a turntable isn't an instrument. And I always am like in the comments being like, no, it's definitely 100% an instrument. Like you have to take
that makes
the
it even
same
cooler.
context of practicing and like learning your instrument essentially.
Well, that makes DVS. What you guys don't, if you don't know what that is, digital vinyl, signal, maybe. I don't know. When you can have a time code record, code records. I love them because when people are like, oh, you use a computer when you DJ, you're like, yup.
Yep.
But if you're a turntablist, it really doesn't matter. You just don't have to carry records with you, and you can have multiple colors, and you could switch it up. But
I've done both.
I mean, no,
my first gig ever, I actually lugged like probably 40 or 50 crates on the bus, and I was playing a high school talent show.
That's what's up.
It was terrible. I had like my mixer and my turntables in this giant bag, and then I had my crates, and I was sitting on the bus holding my crates for $200.
Yep. Mine was cheaper than 200. Oh, I was doing that before Serato, and I think
I love Serato.
I love Serato. It's great. Or any kind of DVS thing.
Tractor too. Yeah.
But I will say this for people who know, very, very, very big difference between scratching on real records, scratching on Serato records, scratching on Tractor records. I don't know about Record Box records because I haven't used them enough.
Yeah.
But
it's a whole different world. Honestly.
Well, they just feel different a little bit. There's like a little, I don't know, something.
There's a delay with DVS that maybe that's less like when I'm scratching a real record, like you can kind of feel it a little bit more, and you can kind of get a little bit more detail out of it. But with a DVS record, with a time code vinyl, to me, this is my own personal opinion. There's a bit of a delay in when your hand moves and the record is read from the computer. So that delay kind of messed me up sometimes.
It might be. It's just it's a little different feel, in my opinion, that I'm saying. It's a bit different feel for me.
Yeah.
I like them both, but I think, like you said, when it's printed on the record, something about it, just like, okay, here's another thing. If I put the labels on, and the needle skips sometimes, like you put a label on there, the DVS, the needles, it's not, maybe they don't skip, but it goes off a little bit.
It just goes off.
A real record, it's the same spot no matter what you do.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a skipless record, then it's going to be good to go.
Yep.
So next up, guys, what we want to talk about real quick, I want to mention a few more people who really inspired me in the turntablism world. One being DJ Jazzy Jeff. He is widely subjectively accredited with creating Transform Scratch and the Chirp. Again, there might be other people who invented this. Send me an email. Let us know. highfrequenciespodcast@gmail.com. So DJ Jazzy Jeff, he was the guy on Fresh Prince. If you watched that, he was the DJ on there, and he was DJ
He'd be
Jazzy
the one
Jeff.
who always gets thrown out of the house.
but he was like the very first time, in my opinion, again, subjective, that a lot of people would be like, oh, this is DJ Jazzy Jeff. Like, I remember watching that at my house with my parents walking around, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff." People knew him, so it was like really widely known. So he created this technique, and I'll show you on the fader, of calling a transform and a chirp. Now, if he didn't, I'll still explain what it is. But in my opinion and research, he did.
Yeah.
So with the chirp, with the transform, what it is essentially you're taking a sound and you are chopping it into a lot of pieces. And it's something called a closed fader technique. So it starts off with the fader totally closed, the turntable totally off, and then it just opens up the sound, sort of like going like bop, 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 bop. And you can, there's two ways to use a mixer. One of the ways is the normal way. If you're using it the normal way, you'll apply a bit of pressure with your thumb to keep it closed, and then do little flicks with your fingers just to kind of open the fader and then to shut it again. Like bop, bop, bop,
really
bop,
quick.
bop,
Like,
bop. And if you're the other way, which is the way that I do it, which it doesn't matter which way, it's backwards, right? So you're going to keep a little bit of pressure with these fingers and you're going to pop with your thumb to open it like that. The reverse way I do it is called hamster style. This is digging in my brain, the scratch hamsters. What was it? Yeah, he's gonna look it up right now.
Yeah, I'm looking it up.
Oh God, see, there you go. We're not editing this show, guys.
Yeah, this is live.
Hamsters.
I'm live. Scratch hamsters.
They changed it to space travelers now, but it's who was it? Just type in scratch hamsters into Google, and what do you see?
Yeah, it's hamster versus regular. Scratch hamsters. That's the name.
Okay. Let's see here.
History of the hamster switch. The bulletproof scratch hamster.
Yes, the bulletproof scratch hamster.
That's the full name. Yeah.
That's the full name. So now back to this, guys.
Yeah.
We'll edit it there. Just kidding. So bulletproof scratch hamsters changed their name later to bulletproof space travelers who invented hamster style. There you go for the history. Now, other way around, you can just use it normally. I remember on my very first mixer, it didn't have a hamster switch. So a lot of these mixers now have a switch to switch the crossfader back and forth. I actually had to wire the wires in opposite ways, like so it was backwards on the channels, so I would be able. And then eventually,
so it flip your channels for you.
Yes, it was really weird. So A was on B and B was on A. The other thing I did eventually is I unscrewed it, picked the crossfader up, turned it 180 degrees, put it back down, and I screwed it in like that. And then I didn't have to rewire it. Yeah. So this was the very first ways. Now, the only reason you would have a difference in the way you do it is what feels more natural to you.
Yeah.
I just ended up, I didn't know the difference, and I started doing it that way, and I was like, well, I guess I do it backwards.
Yeah.
But so point of it is, guys.
It's like skating goofy.
Yeah, or snowboarding, yeah. So it's like you're popping a sound, you're like, bop, 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 bop. I'll show you guys in audio examples later on, but it sounds like a transformer, like a robot. It's called the transformer scratch. I just call it transform or like transforming, but it's like the transformer scratch, and it just basically takes a sound, and then if you're going humming with your mouth, you just open your lips like ma ma ma. It sounds really dumb, but so it starts off with closed fader. Now the other one is going to be a chirp. Now chirp is open fader. So chirp starts off open fader, which means it's right in the middle on your mixer, and it's going to be playing both sides. So you push this record forward, and it goes wah, and then you close this fader
up in pitch,
and then you pull it back, and it goes pwa,
and then it goes down.
You open this fader right as you're pulling it back. So it would be like this, pa, pa, like that. And I opened it right as it came in. Now, if you're doing it, depending on the direction, one way with your thumb, it would be like this. And then the way that I would be like this and then back. So you kind of.
And we're going to have some audio samples in this.
I will definitely have some audio samples for this. Yeah. But those are huge techniques. Transform, it makes it go like and chirp will go like ba 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 ba. Yeah, so it's very, very cool stuff. It made it fast, basically. The whole point of this, guys, is made it faster. So instead of going like scratch, 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 you're chopping it into 4 pieces or 3 pieces or 2 pieces. So that is the transform and the chirp. So now we have Jam Master Jay. I want to acknowledge him. Run DMC. What was so cool about Run DMC is they didn't have a lot of, in my opinion, again, argumentative and subjective, they didn't have a lot of like strings and pads and these kinds of things. It was just direct drums and voice. And it was like, and it was really cool.
Yeah.
So he invented Scratch DJ Academy in 2002. Upon his death, they named it after him, which is huge. Scratch DJ Academy. That's huge in the world of turntablism.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, we'll mention Africa Bambaataa, who is a former Black Spade, won an essay contest. This is the beginning of hip hop times. And then he won a trip to Africa. So he goes to Africa and he sees how these people are living, and it inspired him to change his ways and his name. So he came back to America, called himself Bambaataa, and he started a new organization as a sub-organization to the Black Spades, and it was called the Bronx River Organization. Bronx River Organization had people from all over in part of that. Some of the people weren't from the Bronx, so they were like, this is kind of weird. So they changed the name to Zulu Nation. And this began organizing block parties with Zulu Nation. And he would begin saying, like, I want you to play during this slot. And he would say, play this break during this time. He was very, very influential. Watch the movie Scratch. Okay, watch the movie Scratch. It tells all of this. But very influential. And really, I remember seeing Cut Chemist and DJ Shadow play his record collection. And it was like Shadow just straight vinyl. Oh my God, it was amazing.
Yeah, I've seen DJ Shadow live. He's phenomenal.
Oh yeah, all these guys are.
Yeah.
So next up, we're going to talk about Steve D out of Harlem. Steve D is one of the original X-Men. So there was like a bunch of these hip hop or like turntablist crews, like DJ crews, you know. And my favorite, again subjective, Invisible Scratch Pickles, but there was another one called Executioners that were their rivals, and they originally were the X-Men, but they changed it to Executioners later. Again, I am not a historian. One of the original members, there was 11 original members of the X-Men. One of those guys is Steve D, and Steve D is accredited with creating musical beat juggling. So while there were other people who had beat juggling, like extending the breaks, you could say it was beat juggling.
Yeah.
Steve D created musical compositions out of beat juggling. So you could play a brand new song out of, and he was really one of the first people to do that. Now, also going to give mention Executioners. We got Rock Rada. He is one of the craziest. If you haven't ever heard of Rock Rada and you like DJing, go into YouTube and type in Rock Rada and look at him, because it is the most insane body tricks you will ever see. In my opinion, he is one of the biggest inspirations for me. Even just doing one body trick, you're just like that. Who inspired that? Rock Rada.
Yeah, body tricks are crazy. I've never tried.
And Rob Swift, Total Eclipse, Mr. Sinister, DJ Boogie Blind, and shout out to DJ Precision, other notable turntablists, part of the Executioners.
Yeah.
Final thing I'd like to add, guys, if you want to know more about hip hop culture and you feel like you don't, well, first off, watch the video Scratch. That's a huge one. Additionally, here's some more things you can check out. I wrote them down for you. So 1982, Wild Style. If you haven't seen it, watch it tonight.
100%. That's probably the main one you should watch. If you don't watch any of the other ones, watch Wild Style.
Watch that one.
Yeah.
1983, Style Wars. 1984, Beat Street. Check both of those out.
Beat Street is another one of those. Yep.
1985, Crush Groove.
That's another good one.
I just threw this one in because this is probably one of my absolute top all-time favorite movies of all time ever. Juice, 1992.
Oh,
go watch Juice.
Oh my God.
Just the fact that like
Juice,
that was the first time I think I watched Turntablists, besides because I heard Grand Mixer DXT. I didn't see him on TV. I had the CD of that and I listened to it. But the first time I saw like turntable battles was in Juice, and I was just like that, you know, that scene, and it just like,
yo, Juice is like one of those movies that's just like, it's even influenced hip hop like into the future. Like, I got the juice now. Like that movie to me, even when I was a kid, like when I watched that, me and my friends would quote that shit at each other.
Riverside, like, motherfucker.
Yeah, Riverside, motherfucker. Like that type of shit to me was just like a part. It's become a part of the larger culture. It's like that's just one of those movies. Like, like definitely. I think there's even a song now. I forgot who it's by, but the hook is him just being like, I got the juice. Like,
yeah.
That's just dope. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who, it's on the new AP. Got that juice.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Don
Yo Gotti?
Tolliver, I think.
It's Yo Gotti, I think.
Yo Gotti? Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. I
Is
think
it? Okay.
it's either Yo Gotti or Don Toliver, I think.
I think it's Yo Gotti. I'm pretty sure. I got that juice.
Yeah.
New AP. Anyways. All right. So moving on, guys. Let's go to some ads.
Yeah, let's do it. This podcast is also sponsored by JMBK Audio. Head over to jmbkaudio.wordpress.com for all your mixing and mastering services. On another note, you can check out my co-host Jordan's music under the name Zybrium at soundcloud.com/Zybrium. That's XYBRIUM.
All right. Thanks for that, Jamaal.
You're very welcome.
We're gonna finish the end of this show, guys, with two really awesome topics.
Yeah.
The first topic being trap and trap music.
Yeah.
This is gonna be something that is gonna be legendary.
Yes.
Then we're gonna talk about 808s. This is also gonna be equally legendary. So I hope you guys are ready
and
for
how
it.
to make 808s too.
How to make 808s, and I'm gonna show you some sampling tricks.
Yeah.
So Jamal's gonna show you some sound design with some 808s. I'm gonna show you some sampling tricks.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start off with the history of trap. So Jamaal,
Yes.
what is your perspective? Because I know you were very around this and you experienced the beginnings of this. Can you talk to us about the beginnings of trap as much as you know, whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah. So there's always a dispute as to who started what. And
For sure.
The trap, however, is something that's specific to the South and specific to Atlanta. The trap is basically like the term trap is the ghetto. That's really what it means, is the ghetto, especially down South. You had essentially three choices: selling drugs to make money. And obviously, if you're selling drugs, you're probably going to die or go to jail. And so that's why these types of neighborhoods were called the trap, because it was a trap that you couldn't really get out. And especially back then, for me, from what I know of and from what I've listened to, the term trap was first used in the song by Goody Mob. And I forgot I think it's either Bun B or one of the other rappers who were from the South. They started using the term trap to refer to those neighborhoods as opposed to just the term like trap. And that was way back in 1995. So in like the early to mid 90s is when the term trap started getting used to refer to that specific area, to like a terrible neighborhood, basically. From then though, this to me is like the process of hip hop traveling around. And because of hip hop, like how I was saying earlier, that basically a lot of black music is like the Journal or like the CNN of what's going on in black neighborhoods. Because of the economic downturn, because of the issues with police and things like that, as hip hop traveled around America to all the different black neighborhoods, it evolved into other things. So for example, in St. Louis and in Memphis, you got crunk music. And then in New Orleans, you ended up getting bounce music. And so hip hop kind of evolved and changed to all these other forms as it moved to different cities. But in Atlanta specifically, it started turning into what we now call trap music. And so I think it may not necessarily be that like one person invented it. I do know people will say that like T.I. and like Gucci Mane were some of the first like trap rappers. I would even say like shout out to people like Young Jeezy. But for me, some of the earliest like from what I've listened to and from what I've known from being younger and like having like mixtape CDs and stuff like that, because some of my family's from down south, and we would listen to a lot of this music, and I'd be down there and I'd be like, this sounds way different, because I'm from New York. So for me, listening to like Nas and Biggie and like A Tribe Called Quest, like that was what my like cultural context was. So when I went down south and I'd hear my cousins listening to like DJ Toomp or like Gucci Mane and things like that, I was like, yo, what is this? And they didn't call it trap back then. They just called it Dirty South rap. Like that's what it was. That was the name. But like some of the pioneers were people like DJ Toomp, Shawty Red, the Ear Drummers even too. They're more modern. But then I think once it became people like T.I., for example, started coming in, and people like what's his name? The dude who made Hard in the Paint. What's his name?
Hard in the Paint, the row.
Why
The
am I-
Row?
No.
No.
It's
I don't know.
hold on.
Heart in the Paint. Oh,
Waka
Waka.
Flocka. There we go. Waka Flocka. I can't believe I forgot Waka Flocka. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
I'm not a music historian. I am. I know.
neither am I. I just know. I'm honestly speaking a lot from the like my music collection and
That's
looking
what
at
I'm
the
saying.
date on it and being like,
Yeah, man.
this is. I would call this a trap song, and this song came out in 2003. So like for
Yeah.
example, producers too. I think a lot of people don't know a lot of the early trap producers because people weren't really calling them out on records, and that's something that became more of a modern hip hop thing. Is producers having tags and even DJs having tags. Like for example, Mike Will Made It, Gucci Mane Slayed It. Like Mike Will Made It is a huge trap producer, and Lex Luger, for example, is a huge trap producer. And partly it's because the rappers were calling them out, saying like, my producer made these beats. So to me, those are a lot of the people who like helped start it with like the Goody Mob, and like even Outkast too, doing like down south rap, and then eventually it became its own like branch of hip hop that turned into trap music as we know it today. So yeah.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, trap music is super influential to me.
Yeah.
Just because I've always, I've been around it, living in the South, and just having. A
Yeah.
lot
Didn't
of
you say you lived in Louisville for a long time?
lived in Louisville, lived in Evansville, Indiana, lived a lot of places.
Yeah.
And not the greatest area. It's part of being a musician, and having no plan B is not living
Some
in the
days you got to be broke. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But
But
you're
I think
dedicating your
it's
life to it. You got to. That's a part of the struggle.
for sure.
It's not
And I
easy
feel
living off of music.
no, man. But I feel a lot of what you said in terms of trap being completely different from anything that I had heard because it's like a shift. This is just guessing, but it's like a shift from like 200 or 100 hertz being the bass, 90 hertz to being 60 hertz, or just like 80 hertz. So it's like that. It's like emphasis on the sub, whereas like Tribe emphasis on like that bass line,
The
whatever
bass,
that thing. Yeah, like 200 hertz or 100 hertz,
like the
that,
low mids, even.
Something like it's not like you can listen to it on a cassette and it bumps, but I feel like trap wouldn't. It would just be like no bass. Like where's the bass? It's not.
And you know what?
Really focused.
I feel like for me, trap is like because of the like harsh areas of where it came from. The frequencies in the actual music reflect that. So like the sub is really, really low. The bass is a bass. The snare is like a snare, like it's like crack,
a snap.
It's like a, and the hi-hats are just pure highs. It's just like just hot. Everything is very
clean,
very, very clean and very saturated. And it's like,
but dirty at the same time.
But really dirty. Yeah. It's almost like if you went into Photoshop and just cranked up the saturation on everything. And that's why I love trap music. Cause it's just like slapping. Like you could
and
throw
it brings back
and
like we were talking about that genuine aspect.
Yeah.
Because it's where a lot of them begin talking again about more real things.
Reality, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It's like
don't
the
get me wrong.
blues. It's like the blues coming back. Again, the South.
But
is
there's
just
a lot. There's a lot of trap that can be maybe talking about being rich and all this cool stuff, which is great, which is good because you want to get there.
Yeah.
But for the ones that aren't, it's cool to also have a lot of perspective into where you're at.
Yeah.
And
I think one thing that is interesting to me about modern hip hop, I know a lot of people will say like, oh, I don't like the cars and the boats and the blah, blah, blah. But I think for me, over a long-term scale, it's interesting to watch the growth of what hip hop was in like the 90s, where it's talking about the struggle, where it's talking about how hard life is. And then now people talking about how great their lives are. And I think that's just an example of the American dream, where it's like you start off with nothing and you work your ass off, and then you end up saying like, I'm now a millionaire. I'm now
I agree.
And I think
agree,
that's
but
an
I'm
interesting
saying
story to
if their first record was that they are a millionaire. If their first record was where I was at and then they became that's a different story.
Yeah. See, this is okay. Hold on. Let me input this. As a music producer, that's something that to me that like, it's something that really bothers me as a music producer, because I'll send beats to people and then they'll like, oh, I got cars and I got this and I got that. But then they're asking for the beat for free. And I'm like, can't that doesn't really match up. So yeah, I'm definitely one of those people who's like, if you're gonna rap about that stuff, then actually be able to back it up.
Yeah,
like
for sure. Be about
if you
it.
talk about it, be about it. Like that's
For
how.
sure.
Yeah, that to me is hip hop. That's real hip hop.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like then it becomes pop. Then if you're faking it and you're lying, it's pop. And pop is popular. It's not a genre. It's just popular.
Yeah.
Whatever sells, just to pay the bills. And it's not gonna, in my opinion. Now you could say, what about Whitney Houston? What about Ariana Grande? That's R&B. That's not pop.
Yeah.
So pop, it's not always going to be something that we'll look at in 50 years and say, this is amazing. Like you could look at Tribe Called Quest. And it's the first time I heard that.
It's timeless. Yeah.
It blew my mind. And it was over 10 years old. I didn't hear it the day they came out, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like something that you're like, wow, even listen to Rocket. Listen to Herbie Hancock Rocket. And you'll be like, wow, did this come out yesterday? This is like insane. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. So something that's timeless. And this is another thing, all you producers out there, it doesn't matter if your beat you think it sucks, because it's going to be relatable to somebody else. Like you don't want something that's perfect, because a lot of people aren't going to identify with that. I can't identify. This is the reason I love hip hop. This is the reason that, like, if I'm making drums in my song, I'm going to make them worse sounding than the sample sounds, just because I like that grit. I like to make them not lo-fi, but just like lower quality.
Oh yeah. I spend a lot of time doing that.
I'm not digital. I'm not digital. I am analog. I'm an analog thing. Like I'm all, a dirty circuit, just a normal person, a human being. Yeah. And I think that having that grit and dirt and life in your music will help perpetuate that into something that becomes immortal. So if you want to be immortal, like, I don't know, pick somebody, Tupac, pick somebody else, anybody who's dead and still talked about and still played and relevant, still the number one. Well, it's because they were real. It's because he's not sitting there making up crap and then saying like, I hope people buy it. No, it's just a documentation of their life, their pursuit from A to B. And that's what I feel true hip hop is. And that's what I feel is the biggest identifier in something that would be genuine and influential to a period of time or an individual.
Yeah. Agreed. Very much agreed. So do you want to shift into actually how to make some
for
trap
sure
elements?
For sure. Definitely.
All right. Let's do that. So I'm going to switch this over to Ableton.
So right now what we're going to be doing is Jamaal is going to show us how to create from scratch, from nothing, an 808. So if
how to make an 808.
Now, if you don't know what an 808 is, it's a drum machine made by Roland in the 80s, and it's very expensive and it's very old. So if you're it's very hard to
it's very
find
expensive.
A reason to connect.
It's very old.
And you're gonna have to probably fix it up.
It's hard to find. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard to make the purchase because you don't know the condition it's in. They all sound different though. So it's cool. But also you don't want to fix it up because they sound different. So.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to get rid of that magic. That's part of the reason why they sound cool.
So you might want to make it. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. You might want to make it from scratch in Ableton. All right. So first things first is I use Operator for this, but you don't have to use Operator. You can use any synthesizer that has a sine wave oscillator on it. It doesn't have to necessarily be frequency modulation, although that can help you make some more interesting 808s. So first and foremost, it's just simple sine wave. Because you're making a bass sound, you're not going to want to be playing, like, for example, chords. So I'm not going to be making chords here. So I need just one voice. So I'm going to switch this to one single voice. So then if I try to play a chord, it's only going to play one note. Now what I'm going to do is let's put in some MIDI notes. Let me actually make this loop a lot smaller. Let's do that. And then I'm going to do a really simple 808 pattern. We're at 150 BPM, which most trap music happens between probably 60 BPM all the way up to 80 BPM. And a lot of the time I make it double time. So instead of it being 60 BPM, that would be 120 BPM. And instead of 75, that would be 150. So that's why that's like that. So yeah. All right, cool. We got a little basic beat here, basic kick pattern, I should say, because it's not a full beat. And then what you're going to do in operator specifically is you're going to take the sustain down, because at 808, it's not just a sustained sub. It's not just one long sub. That's why it's kind of differentiated between a sub and an 808. It kind of starts loud and then trails off on the end. So in order to do that, I'm going to be using the decay. So then we end up with more of a sound like that. And obviously we're doing a bass sound, so I'm going to drop the transpose down a couple of octaves. There we go. That sounds a little better. I need to get to my mixer. Yeah, trying to make it loud. There we go. Much better. And we're almost there. This doesn't quite sound like a trunk rattling 808. That's what we really need. So I'm going to take my filter. I'm going to switch it to the 12 because the 12 is a little bit more analog sounding, and that's really what we're going for here. And I'm also going to switch to one of these different settings. It doesn't really matter which one. Just pick one of these because these are all emulating analog circuits for analog filters. And then that gives you access to this filter drive right here. And that's where that dirtiness comes from. So first, again, because we're using a bass sound, I'm going to move this down. This is kind of subjective. Usually I set it somewhere between 200 to 400 hertz. That you can put it wherever you want, as long as it's below 400. And then you're going to turn up the filter drive. Yeah, that's where let me turn the decay down a little. All right, so we're almost there. Now, in order to actually take your 808 to a whole new level, you need to have that smack at the beginning of the kick. So I turn on my pitch envelope, turn up the percentage up to 100%. And right now, if I just press play on this, you're getting a little bit of that ooh, ooh. And if I just shorten that pitch change, instead of it being as long as it is, I'm going to shorten my decay time on my pitch envelope. So I'm going to set it to 120 milliseconds. And then I'm going to take my peak and I just crank that all the way up. I just put it up 4 octaves, up to plus 48 semitones. And then now I kind of tweak the decay a little until I get that nice punch at the beginning of the sound. And then that's the basic 808. Now to really make your 808 sound nice and sound like a slapping 808, this is kind of one of my own personal tricks, but I introduced a little bit of frequency modulation. And it kind of makes the sound a little bit more aggressive. And then I grab a distortion plugin. So most of the time I'll use either saturator or pedal in Ableton, but pretty much any distortion plugin will work. I may not necessarily use both on this one, but I usually start with saturator just because it's one of my favorite distortion plugins. And then now you can hear it's starting to get that nice heavy hit. And I usually use the analog clip one. And turn on soft clip, turn up the drive a little bit. And I could just stop there. I'm going to turn off saturator and then we can audition the pedal sound. So if I just turn it on and then turn up the gain a little bit, we get a little bit of a different tone out of the 808. And then a lot of the time I'll turn on that sub there and then it really, really pushes the low end. And then these different settings, you can switch it from overdrive to distort, or you can put on a fuzz. So yeah, those are the different ways you can do an 808. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off pedal and we're just going to use the saturator one because that's just kind of my favorite one right now. So, all right, so I'm going to resample this. Let's call it Psy 808. And then, Jordan, I'm going to toss this to you once I resample it. So let me put this in resample mode. And then...
All right.
It's already in C. That's part of the benefit of making your own 808 from scratch, is that it's already tuned. And
sounds really good.
Thank you. All right, cool.
Cool, man.
And then let me...
That's a really great sounding 808, Jamaal.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I've been making 808s for a long time now. All right. I'm going to share it in the Zoom chat here.
All right.
Yeah.
So guys, now let's talk for a minute about some sampling tricks with this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to actually show you right now in Ableton because I'm actually recording this podcast to Ableton. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to talk to you about my techniques, and you can try it on your own.
Yes.
So, all right, guys, what's up? Let's talk a bit. So something I fully believe in is definitely make your own sounds like Jamaal just did. That's freaking awesome sounding. It sounds super dope. But for me, I prefer to use samples. Why do I prefer to use samples? I prefer to use samples because it sounds more like the original. Haha. That's funny. No, but I prefer to use samples because it is the original, you know? So now where Jamaal creates the sounds, that's probably the most efficient way to do it because you have full control.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you don't use Ableton, or let's say you don't want to build sounds, or you don't have a synth, or you're working really quick, or you do already have samples, or you've already made a song and you want to make it better. There's a million reasons why you'd want to know what I'm about to show you. So we're going to talk about it. So it's called 808 sampling tricks. I don't know. I just called it tricks. But let's talk. So I made 6 of them, 6 to make sure yours isn't wrong. And what wrong just means is it'll need to be fixed in the master. And doing a lot of mastering, this is something I try to help the clients avoid. So I, 1, have to do less work. 2, the song sounds a lot better. And 3, the client feels more fulfilled as if they were to do something, and they can keep creating a quality product after that. So let's talk.
Yeah.
First thing I want to make a point is you need to have the first thing to even write down, if you're writing this stuff down, is have a clean, high quality sample.
Yes.
Now, if you can only do 1 sample, make it the highest possible quality you can do. Now, let's talk sample rates quick and bit depth and stuff. If you're like, oh, I don't know about all this, just record it at the highest one you could possibly do. I use everything at 44.1. If you want to record one at 44.1 and one at 48K, that would be the bare minimum. Then you don't have to do any conversions. But if you're fine with doing conversions and you understand how sample rate converters work, then what you could do is get a 96K version at 24-bit. If you're not really sure about bit depth and sample rate, check out my blog. I have 2 articles on there that'll really help you out in talking what that is.
Yeah.
So the second big thing to be aware of is when you're recording these, let's say you have a drum machine and you're recording it from a drum machine. This is great. Make sure it's high quality. Let's say you skip step 1 because you bought a sample pack and it's got 808s. Skip step 1. This is where you start step 2. So you're going to be laying out your bass notes on all these tracks, laying the samples on track 1. Now, there are songs with multiple pitches in the sub. Not every single song has the same note the entire time as the sub. Well, guess what? Different pitches have different levels of RMS. RMS is another word for power. So different sub notes have a different perception of power to us because we hear nonlinear. So it's very important to put each sample that contains a different pitch on a separate track and use the volume faders to adjust them to be equal in power. You can do this with metering, with an RMS meter, a VU meter, or just feeling it with your feet on top of the subwoofer and feel how it really reacts. This is a most important thing people don't do, is separating each note to a separate track. It also makes it a little more difficult when there's quick shifts in like octaves because you can run into phase problems. But if you use automation to mute the tracks in between the pitches of the samples, it'll fix that problem right for you. Now, the third thing you got to worry about is if you have a sub, a lot of time, and I'm just speaking specifically about 808 subs. A lot of people will say maybe it's too boomy, maybe it's too bassy, maybe it's not bassy enough, maybe it sounds weird. I'm afraid to EQ it. What do I do? These are common things that people question when they're producing. So something I will always say. My next go-to will be EQing in this exact order. I will do something reductive, and then I will. What I like to say, I will activate the specific frequencies, or what that means is additive EQ. So what I'm doing first reductive is it's just like buying something new. When you buy something new, you better clean up a space for it. So right now inside of our 808, we want to activate something to make, AKA we're going to make it more bassy. We're going to make it sound really good. So something I would look at is the different harmonic series. So if you don't know what that is, check the blog. There's an article about this on my blog, but there's specifically second and third order harmonics. If they are a little bit on the spectral analyzer louder than your fundamental tone visually, if they're like a higher thing, this is like
important.
Almost too much resonance probably exists in this.
So can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, man. Yeah, what's up?
I actually did this without explaining as in depth as you're going, but when I was filtering out the high end on that 808, that's essentially what I was doing, was removing those higher end harmonics so that the sound was actually focused in the sub, so that automatically, no matter what I did to the sound after post-processing wise, that those higher frequencies couldn't be louder than those sub frequencies. So yeah, go ahead, continue.
So what I'm talking about in this case, Jamaal is completely right in that. What I'm talking about in this case is not total removing of the frequencies, of any frequencies, but it's just subtle
Turning
attenuation, maximum 3 decibels I'm talking, of reduction around specifically the second or third order harmonics without affecting fourth, fifth, and above, without affecting any of the top order harmonics. Just doing
a little bit.
A small notch to kind of remove some of that energy. If it is louder than the fundamental, is going to make a lot more room for the low end to integrate in with this sub bass. And a lot of times you just have too much resonance occurring there. So just keep that in mind.
And a lot of times too, this is more of a perceptive thing. It's really hard to hear sub frequencies. So a lot of people will actually have their sub tuned incorrectly, and doing this will actually help you hear the fundamental better.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, post that reduction, I will add an activator to the fundamental tone. And what this just means is like a couple dB boost to that fundamental tone. Now, the reason it's not going to overload my entire track is because we've taken into account prior the little subtle reduction of those second, third order frequencies. The reason I'm saying second, third order frequencies is it's like an octave and a 1.5-ish octave, some weird interval that's going to be a very dissonant interval for your third. And it's going to end up overlapping with that fundamental and making your sub seem a little bit weaker in a sense. The fourth thing to write down is what I'm going to do after I do all of this. I will, such as Jamaal did, audition it through various analog circuits. So it could be a virtual analog, it could be a waves plugin, it could be, let me kind of walk you through my mindset for this. So if it's a tube, a tape, or a transistor, we could just discuss the 3 T's. If it's a tube, you're going to be thinking, what's it going to be doing when I pass it through this tube? Well, it's going to be pushing up, subjectively, it's going to be pushing up second order harmonic, and it's going to be making it more tuned, more localized, centered in your head. It's going to be pushing up like 2 and 4th order and 6th order, and it's going to be reinforcing the octave content in this 808. So what it's going to be doing is making it, like I said, more localized and less dissonant in a way, with the opposing being tapes and being transistors. Those are going to add dissonance, not dissonance, but add less direct intervals. So they're not going to be octaves, but they're going to be things like fifths or thirds or sevenths or ninths, very weird intervals. And what that does, it disassociates the localization of this fundamental tone, spreading out the other harmonics. It makes it more boomy, more wider, more ominous. Put a word in there, but less direct and centered and localized in headphones, aka less tuned. So it's very important at this point what kind of a sound you want to give this 808. If you want to give it like that trunk rattle, whatever kind of thing, it's probably going to be some more odd order push. So maybe like a tape, maybe you run it through a transistor. You want it to be like some super clean, modern kind of trap sound that is just ridiculous amount of bass. You might want to pass it through an even order kind of a circuit. And that's just the fourth thing. Now there's two other things to kind of think about when you are doing sampling or using a sample of an 808, and that is going to be that grit. Now we're starting to add stuff to it, okay? And what you want to add is very, very, very important because it could take away that fundamental. Now, if you don't know what the fundamental tone is, it's that original sine wave that was in that FM synth that Jamaal showed us.
The original sub,
it's just one single frequency. So what I'll do in this case to preserve that, but adding dirt and grit in life, is I'll do something called parallel processing. So I'll send this to return tracks and I'll slam the crap out of the return tracks with distortion, anything I want, because it's preserving that fundamental tone in my sub. What that means is it's not distorting my bass. That's essentially what that means. It's not going to distort
the original
my
bass is still intact. And then what, as you guys probably heard, when I put the fuzz on that pedal with the pedal on, all of the sub disappeared. And that's why there's that sub button on there, is because essentially it turns it into a parallel processor in the plugin. So that's what Jordan's saying, is to, when you distort things too much, you end up losing the fundamental note. So parallel processing is a good way to counteract that, because your fundamental is untouched. And then in the parallel distorted channel, you can do whatever you want because you know your sub is still intact.
For sure. A final last thing. If you want to make some, you don't know what other textures you can possibly apply. Well, I've thought of one. The other thing we can do, and that it might be interesting to do, is try resampling the existing sample at a different bit depth or sample rate. So something like what gave Jay Dilla his sound, or something what gave any original kind of hip hop producers their sound. It was all 12-bit, right? The noise was closer to the signal, so it made it more distorted in a sense, and it made it more like lo-fi gritty. So this is something that could take your drums and just give them a whole different environment, a different world. So not necessarily with the sub, but the other drums on that 808, flipping the bit depth and changing the sample rate can have a drastic difference in sonic texture. And that's all I have to say about sampling techniques.
Even in music, modern music production, 40, who's Drake's producer, he actually will, I've seen this interview before, you guys can find it on YouTube, but he's actually resampled. He uses like Machine and he uses Ableton and all these Native Instruments plugins, but he'll sample it. The original recording is at half of the sample rate. So instead of 44.1, he'll record it at 22,050, I think it is. So when Drake is singing over the top or rapping over the top, those frequencies in Drake's voice, he's recording it at 44.1 or higher. So all those higher frequencies are in Drake's voice, but they're not even recorded into the original instrumental. So a lot of people think that like for that Drake sound that they're filtering or they're using some kind of like auto filter or something like that to cut off the high end in the instrumental. But it's not him actually using a filter. It's just recorded like that. Like those frequencies are not in the sample at all. So that's an example of what you're talking about. Yeah. So
well, there you go.
Really
check out that.
Doing that.
Check out the interview and try that technique, because that sounds pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah. I've used it before. It's pretty interesting. It definitely gives you that like really clean, clear voice over the top of the instrumental. It's pretty cool.
A part of this, guys, is just like experimenting. Like for me, all the weird stuff I just said, I just know that because I didn't know that. And then I learned that
and experimented.
Yeah. So it's like, if you don't know something, write it down and just do experiments until you figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you'll know it, that you'll never unlearn it. It's like a bike.
Yeah.
Like if somebody else wrote it for you and showed you how to do it, you might forget. But if you got to get on that thing and ride, they say you never forget. So
there you go. I don't think I've ever forgotten how to ride a bike. I've been a little wonky if it's been a couple of years, but
for sure.
After 10 minutes, I'm fine.
All right. So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of High Frequencies Podcast. We had a really fun time.
Yes.
And it was a really cool Black History Month edition. So
thank you guys for joining us. And if you guys enjoyed our little tutorial at the end, this podcast is also sponsored by the Garnish Music Production School. If you guys would like to take your music learning to a different level, then you can sign up today for a music production class and receive 5% off with the code HIGH. That's HIGH, HIGH. If you go to edu.garnishmusicproduction.com.
Awesome. Very cool.
Right.
Check out our website, the Garnish Music website.
Yeah.
We're going to have a bunch of episodes of this podcast up soon, so get excited for that.
Yeah.
Next one's going to be great. We don't even have a topic yet. It's going to be so great. So we're just going to pick a topic.
We're going to find something.
So, yes,
Exactly.
let us know what you thought of the show, guys.
Yeah.
If you got some feedback or you got some, hey, you said this date wrong or he didn't invent this, he did. Whatever you think, send us an email, highfrequenciespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's highfrequenciespodcast@gmail.com.
All right. We'll see you guys soon.
See you guys soon.